So I thought I'd do a series of or one video discussing mistakes that I've made in the past in aviation that could have led to an accident, sometimes a catastrophic accident, but luckily didn't. Just because I got away with them, should have made them in the first place. But you know, we learn from each other's mistakes, and so with that in mind, I'd like to talk to you about some of the mistakes I've made. Okay, so not long ago, the road going over to my farm, and I have a little farm in Illinois. Cape Girardeau here is on the west side of the Mississippi. My little farm is on the east side of the Mississippi, and the road's flooded leading up to the bridge where you cross the river, which then at that point I would have to drive a real convoluted route down to the south about 60 miles and back up around on the other side. It took about an hour and 15 minutes to drive it, or I could fly it in a helicopter in about 9 minutes. So as you probably suspect, that I ended up flying back and forth most of the time to the farm. So one day I went over to pick up my wife at the farm, and the aircraft was running. She'd gotten in and out of helicopters hundreds of times before. She knows how to get in and get out with one that's running. So I landed it behind my barn and rolled the throttle down, you know, and she gets in, puts on her seatbelt, had the second set of controls out of the aircraft, and so we pick up and head back to Cape Girardeau. As I get on final for the airport, actually I'm about 3 miles out, and I start doing a bit of a descent, and I made my call to the tower, and they're you know, it cleared me to land. I start coming down with the collective, and I can't get the collective down very far. It'll only come down about 1.5 inches or 2 inches, about it, you know. And so I run my hand down the inside of the collective. In fact, I'll show you what it was doing here. So I could raise the collective, there's pretty much full up, and I could lower it right there to the hard stop. I could not get the collective down any farther than that. Again, I could raise it, but lower it right there, that's it. So, and I've got the second set of controls in there just to show you. It's easier to see what it was doing then. So I'm like, well, I never encountered a stuck collective before, and I figured there was something up under the collective. So I ran my hand down under, curled it under, and ran it all the way down to the side of the collective as far as I could get it, and I couldn't feel a thing. So I had my hand, and I'll show you what I was doing. I had my hand running under the collective like this all the way down. I could go all the way to the friction tab here, and I'm like, there's nothing under it, you know. And went down the other side, couldn't feel anything. So I'm like, man, this is a new one, haven't had this before. So I notified the tower, said, hey, I'm probably gonna have to run this thing on. I've got collective I can't get all the way down. And so on the way in, I slowed the aircraft down. I wanted to see what airspeed at that collective setting it would take for the aircraft to start to descend. And so if I'd slow it down to about 40, I could get a descent rate going. And if I sped up to about 60 to 65, I could get a descent going at that collective setting. So my plan was, and again, I notified the tower, and I told him, I said, well, I may need to run the aircraft on, you know, because I can't get the collective full down. And they even asked me, do you need to clear it in emergency? And I'm like, no, I can get it on the ground. I just may have to do a run on, you know. That was mistake number one. Should have declared an emergency. But anyway, so I figured out that if I slowed down to about 40 to 45, aircraft would actually start to descend a bit, and if I sped up to 60 to 65, the aircraft would actually descend. So what I did was I kept my speed up and made it descend at about 75 or so. I used my increased airspeed to effect a descent. Got to the end of the runway, and then I just held the aircraft over the end of the runway at about, you know, 4 or 5 feet over the runway, and kept bringing the nose up, slowing it down. It did balloon up just a bit, but then as I got through to 40 to 45 where the aircraft starts to settle in, then I raised the collective, and thank goodness I had collective. My concern was that the collective was going to be stuck in that position, and I wasn't going to be able to raise the collective and have you know, the ability to add power and hover. And my plan was that I'd slow it down until it was descending a bit. If collective wasn't there to be had, I'd just level the skids and run it on at about 45 or 40 or whatever, you know. So okay, so I finally got the thing to a, you know, got it to a hover, called the tower, said, hey, we're good, I need to reposition over to the Cape Copters ramp. And that was mistake number 2. Mistake number 2 was actually hover taxiing the aircraft back over to the ramp. When I got over to the ramp and set the aircraft down, then I was able to roll the throttle down, shut the aircraft down, have my wife get out, and lo and behold, I'll show you what I found here. All right, if you guys can look right down in between the sides of the seats, there's a nice cell phone that's turned on its side. All right, so that thing had the collective trapped. I mean, I could not go any farther down than that with it. Okay? And what had happened is when my wife got in the helicopter, I'll blame it on my wife. When my wife got in the helicopter, her cell phone had slid out of her pocket and went right down in between the space in between the seats and got wedged under the collective. I came out here before I did this video, and I literally dropped the phone in there about 150 times. I could not make it do exactly what it did that one time, but it's Murphy's Law. The one time you need it not to get wedged under there, it's going to do it. So, all right. So, actually, it made 3 mistakes. Number 1, the biggest mistake I made was when she got in the aircraft was not making sure that her pockets were empty. And usually when you get in the helicopter, when we're doing flight and training, I'll have everybody just empty your pockets, both pockets out, and put everything out of your pockets under the seat. That way you never have to worry about something falling out of somebody's pocket and getting wedged under the collective, or, you know, a lot of times we fly with the doors off. You don't want your keys to fall out of your pocket and end up in the middle of the Mississippi River or whatever. So that was mistake number 1, not making sure that her pockets were empty. Mistake number 2 is not declaring an emergency. And mistake number 3 was not just setting the aircraft down and shutting it down and figuring out what the problem was. I knew I had the ability to hover the aircraft, and I brought it over to the ramp and shut it down. Had I had it to do over again, I probably should have just sat it down on the runway and figured out what the problem was.